So this is actually sort of a shorter chapter. So it kind of works out here today. This is Arya 5. This is actually really just kind of a retelling of the Battle of the Bells and a little bit of like history. So Harwin tells Arya about the Battle of the Bells, where her father defeated Lord Connington, Aerys II Targaryen, the Mad King's hand. In a fierce battle fought in the streets of the Stony Sept, Robert Baratheon was injured and hiding in the city when the Hand's army invaded the town. Many credit Robert with the victory, but the king always said that Eddard had won the battle. Arya is disturbed to find Northmen being starved in cages and gives one of them water. They were Karstark men captured by the Mad Huntsman. The Northmen are guilty of rape and pillaging, and Engai puts them out of their misery. The Brotherhood Without Banner spends the night at the Peach, a brothel. During the night, they hear a commotion and watch as the Mad Huntsman brings somebody as a prisoner into the city chains. Arya recognizes the captive.
And who would that captive happen to be? The Hound. Sandor Clegane, which is kind of funny because the Mad Huntsman has the pack of dogs in the
correct.
Hound.
Yes.
So it's kind of that's George being cheeky, I think.
Yeah.
This chapter is very important for the sole fact that it shows off a lot of the nuances of war. And we know that there are we're cheering for the North. I mean, most people I think are cheering for the North in this book. But we hear of deeds that they're doing that are less than worthy of praise, right? We're talking about the Northern are guilty of rape and pillaging, and then they're being put to death. So in this time of war, there are immoral things happening on both sides. Now, whether or not the overall cause for the North is one that we support, I think it is, but it just shows you how terrible this is. And I think it also is supposed to make us feel a little bit more for the Brotherhood Without Banners and understand their positioning in the war as well.
Yeah, I agree. I think when we look at the Brotherhood Without Banners, because they end up going right with Lady Stoneheart, and I think then when we see them, later, it kind of feels they kind of feel like a group that sets out with a good idea and a good intention and then gets kind of dissuaded along the way. But I think this chapter actually does a good job of kind of showing some of them in a good light.
Yeah, definitely. And the Brotherhood Without Banners, I mean, if you think about their end game and where do they go from here, there's almost no way it ends well, right? They're stuck between two armies on King's orders that he's dead, right? In the hand of Eddard, right? And he's dead. So they're lost in limbo. And I don't know. I love the Brotherhood Without Banners. They're one of my favorite groups in the book. I fully support them. I know Ez was a huge fan of the Brotherhood Without Banners back in the day, and I think he passed on a lot of that passion to me because every time they're on page, I just love reading about them because they're complex,
Yeah. There's a few things I wanted to get pulled up here. I just had like 80 million tabs open here, so I was like trying to find something, and I found it here, and that is there's a person mentioned in this chapter that kind of ties into like a bigger kind of theory or whatever, and that is a character named Tansy.
Yes.
Who works at this brothel. So like the chapter starts and we get the story of right the Battle of the Bells. It's actually quite short, to be honest. So I'll read just a little bit of it here. So the Mad King's men had been hunting Robert, trying to catch him before he could rejoin your father, he told her as they rode towards the gate. He was wounded, being tended by some friends, when Lord Connington, the Hand, took the town with a mighty force and started searching house by house. Before they could find him, though, Lord Eddard and your grandfather came down on the town and stormed the walls. Lord Connington fought back fierce. They battled in the streets and alleys, even on the rooftops, and all the septums ring their bells so the small folk would know to lock their doors. Robert came out of hiding to join the fight when the bells began to ring. He slew 6 men that day, they say. One was Miles Mouton, a famous knight who'd been Prince Rhaegar's squire. He would have slain the Hand too, but the battle never brought them together. Connington wounded your grandfather, Tully, sore, though, and killed Sir Dennis Arryn, the darling of the Vale. But when he saw the day was lost, he flew off as fast as the griffins on his shield. The Battle of the Bells, they called it. Robert always said your father won it, not him. So a few things there, and I want to tie it in here, is one, this is like an epic masterclass by George Martin. Okay. Because I might be mistaken, but I believe this is the first time John Connington is mentioned. If not the first, it's certainly one of the first.
It's an early reference. I feel like Connington was mentioned earlier in earlier books, maybe by like in a conversation.
Right. I believe you can see probably his writing process, where this is a character he's at the time, this is book 3. And we know that the next 2 books were really supposed to be 1.
Right.
So you can kind of see him fleshing out John Connington a little bit here. Yeah, let's have this guy at a battle. Let's have him lose, but live, because I have a piece for him later. Now, Connington could have at this point been like killed off. George could have killed him off, and then oddly he's saved, it from the writing process. I think when you think about it, he's like, no, I'm going to save this guy, and then later brings him in and has him as a point of view character.
Yes, and this is how this story has grown on George over time, right? And I do think that these are breadcrumbs because he knew that he was going to serve a pretty big purpose later in the story. It looks like he was mentioned in the Clash of Kings. Tyrion tells Peter Baelish that John Connington was one of the 2 recent hands who died landless and penniless in exile. And then in A Storm of Swords, actually, right before this, Barristan Selmy talks about John Connington to being Rhaegar's best friend and like brother, basically, to Daenerys. And Jaime Lannister recalls that John was one of the series of hands of the king for Aerys who served so briefly that he remembers their heraldry better than their faces, which I think is
originally he died.
Yes, that is kind of the story. That's the story.
It's one of those. But yeah, it's one of those things where he's mentioned. So you can even there see George mentioning him. But so here he's brought a character essentially back from the dead and saved him. So this might be like a moment creatively, as I love to look at, like that, as well as one of the things we do when we discuss things week to week, is look at some of these characters, and you can kind of think of like George Creative's process of like, no, maybe I'll actually save that guy.
He makes mistakes too. I mean, John Connington is listed in the appendix of Dance of Dragons as a former like Lord of Storm's End, when it was supposed to be Lord of Griffin's Roost. That's like one of the famous mistakes that George made in the books.
Right.
So I think that things come and go in George's creative process.
Yeah. Right. So yeah, you have that too. But in that passage of the story being told, we are also given this thing where it says Connington wounded your grandfather Tully. So like the idea of Hoster Tully gets brought up, and then later we go to this brothel where we meet a character named Tansy. It's just one of the things George does. He always loves to bring in, to somehow like mention a person who then will later tie into like a theory, which is why these theories get created, because he always does this in his proximity. Is like he tries to hint at things. So we meet this character named Tansy, who's basically just this woman at this brothel, right? It's certainly, it's like a big red herring, right? It's one of the first times you can kind of be like, oh yeah, Hoster Tully is saying the word Tansy on his deathbed, right? So is this the Tansy he's talking about? And it may not be like forcing Liza to give up a child. I mean, that's where you could kind of come in and, like family, duty, or honor. It's interesting that it could be. It's one of the things that I think causes it to be a theory and not a fact.
Yes. I mean, the thing about Tansy is that there's an innkeeper, there's an orphan girl at the crossroads, right? And then Tansy is also a plant that is used in moon tea that causes abortion. So it's almost like George is giving us 3 things and being like, choose your own adventure, pick which one you would like.
And that's all you're ever going to get.
That's right. And that's why I love it. I mean, I've always subscribed to Tansy being the moon tea because I feel like it's a really good misdirection of us being like, who is Tansy, when we should be asking, what is Tansy? I like that twist on the event, but really you could make a case for all of them.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what he does. And I think that's one of the, like, this right here is one of the things we should look at when we think about going forward in the series of all the theories we hope we're going to get answers for in Winds of Winter and A Dream for Spring, and perhaps other books if he decides to not try to cap this entire thing into 2 books, is you can look right here at the Tansy thing and saying, The idea is Hoster Tully saying it on his deathbed. We think it means he caused Lysa to have to give up her first child, who may have been named Tansy or used the moon tea, or perhaps he is talking about this brothel woman or some other woman that he slept with, in adultery, and that's what he's doing. And I think that is a good place to look at a lot of the other theories we think might all get answers to, is that sometimes George in the series has already done what he will do in these other books, which is give you a few possible answers to a theory, and that's all we're going to get, and you just have to choose on your own, and that's what makes it fun.
Yeah, definitely. And that's why the series will probably live a little bit longer than a lot of other contemporary fantasy series. Also, having a massive mega million hit TV show definitely helps with that as well.
Yeah,
but Lord of the Rings was going to be around regardless of the movies, in my opinion, even though the movies put it to another stratosphere. But Tolkien also has a lot of legend and myth and interpretations of who was what, and blue wizards and all types of things. So I think he's kind of following Tolkien in his approach to lore in that way. And mystery.
Yeah, agreed. So there's some other things after they finish that story, then they kind of go into this town and they see people like hanging in cages. And I think, with Arya beginning to see a couple things happen here. It's, I guess, maybe I kind of want to view it as like another shift as we keep viewing like the shift in Arya's character, is that I think now that she's kind of done, she's not totally done, but in a way she's somewhat done of like being scared and being like she's chased constantly. Now she's kind of with a group. She seems like she feels a little more protective. Her character feels a little like not at guard the entire time, and she's beginning to kind of form some like opinions of things. This is, to me, the beginning of the shift, whether or not that we get the Hound at the end, who she's next going to journey with. It feels like she's already kind of going down that path herself a little bit.
Oh, definitely. And her personality and her identity shifts many times throughout this book. I think also like the reality of this is kind of in contrast with what we're going to see at the Red Wedding, with a bunch of Northmen doing really awful things. And she's seeing Northmen who have committed crimes that are being put to death and feels a certain way about it. But by the end of the book, she's going to see that her own Northmen who should have been supporting her houses are actually responsible for the slaughter and death of her family. And Arya, maybe out of everyone, is going to learn the lesson that things are very gray in this world, not black and white, even though she'll be going to the House of Black and White, which is interesting.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. So so pulled up here. Let me pull this up. So as they're walking in and she's beginning to look around, right? In the market square at the town's heart stood a fountain in the shape of a leaping trout, spouting water into a shallow pool. Women were filling pails and flagons there. A few feet away, a dozen iron cages hung from creaking wooden posts. Crow cages, Arya knew. The crows were mostly outside the cages, splashing in the water or perched atop the bars. Inside were men. Lem rined up, scowling. "What's this now?" "Justice," answered a woman at the fountain. "What, did you run short of hempen rope? Was this done at Sir Wilbert's decree?" asked Tom. A man laughed bitterly. "The lions killed Sir Wilbert a year ago. His sons are all off with the young wolf, getting fat in the west. You think they give a damn about the likes of us? It was the Mad's huntsmen caught these wolves." Wolves. Arya went cold. Rob's men and my father's. She felt drawn toward the cages. The bars allowed so little room the prisoners could neither sit nor turn. They stood naked, exposed to the sun and wind and rain. The first three cages held dead men. Crows had eaten out their eyes, yet the empty sockets seemed to follow her. The fourth man in the row stirred as she passed. Around his mouth, he was a ragged beard, thick and bloody with flies. They exploded when he spoke, buzzing around his head. "Water." He heard the croak. "Please, water."
Brutal.
Yeah. And then, I mean, this is also a thing too, where we're talking about crow cages, and then it feels like the crow's eyes are following her.
And what if Bran
Any significance there?
Probably not, but for fun. Let's just say maybe Bran is looking in on this moment.
I mean, possibly. You know, that is something that I haven't really dove into and should look at, especially since we know in the show, obviously Arya kills the Night King. You'd feel like she'd be somebody who Melisandre and all these other people would see more. And at the end of the day, regardless, she is certainly some sort of agent of the House of Black and White, but it doesn't feel like any prophecies or anything or none of the gods that we have access or ties to in any way ever feel like Arya is somebody that they pay attention to outside of like the House of the Black and White, obviously, but like it doesn't feel like any of our insight to R'hllor or perhaps the Great Other with a three-eyed crow, if Bran is an agent of whatever that thing is going on there, none of them ever feel like Arya is somebody that they're looking at.
Well, that is completely congruent with her character, and Arya in the series is one that many people do not pay attention to, and then she kind of does go under the radar, even when people seem to be looking for her to capture her or to hold her prisoner or hostage or whatever. That's Arya's character. She's constantly being overlooked and almost mocked in some ways, right? Whenever she wants to learn the sword, and her dad's like, "No, you're a lady. You learn how to knit. You learn how to do these things." So I think that's consistent with her character. Will she end up having a major moment in the books that will kind of go in the face of her being ignored and, you know, maybe undervalued? I think so. Will she kill the Night King? No. Probably not. Probably
There
not.
might not even be a Night King.
It might not be. But I think that Arya in many ways is the like true underdog of the story. Hard to not pick Bran because his legs don't work.
I guess,
but, you know,
I guess more what I'm saying is, should we view something like that as that the House of Black and White, right, is and is separate, or the other gods is like, is it like R'hllor and the Great Other are having a war and a battle, and all of the other gods kind of do their own thing?
Yeah, that's a very difficult question. The one thing we can say for sure is the House of Black and White definitely has some of the more on the nose fantastical elements in the story. So you would have to think that if you're looking at things that have actually been able to perform some sort of like magic, R'hllor and the House of Black and White are definitely the two that come to mind. So why wouldn't the House of Black and White be on the same level as the Great Other or R'hllor? Why not?
Yeah. Okay, let's continue on here. So again, Arya was looking at all of these cages and beginning to wonder. I have seen some people speculate online that I think that perhaps some of, like, they're described as some very fat people in the cages, that those might be like Manderleys.
Well, that's just rude.
I know, but that's just what they're saying. And this is one of these chapters too that you get a lot of these, like, this is one of those, like, I call it like the side chapter characters, or these side character chapters, I should say, where you have all these people you can really kind of go through and track, where it's like, oh, like sometimes you hear about like a little, as we saw, in that Bran chapter a while ago. And it's like somebody who's from House Little, and then a name gets mentioned, and you kind of have to like piece it together and draw your map along the wall, with all your strings going all over the walls like a crazy person, to try and find out who are these potential characters. This is definitely one of these chapters.
Yeah. And Mad Huntsman and Anguy, I always have trouble saying his name, Anguy, are two people actually who reoccur later and are part of the rift that happens when Lady Stoneheart is resurrected in the Feast for Crows, and ones that are following and are not following. And I like that. I kind of like that the Brotherhood with Bob Banners get named here. We get a little bit more about them, but they also have their own agency later in the story about whether or not they're going to follow this new leader of Lady Stoneheart or not. Anguy has some interesting trivia, by the way. Anguy, who's the archer, he's a fantastic archer. George R. R. Martin was probably inspired by his father when he wrote about Anguy spending 10,000 golden dragons on women and drinking, as his father won $10,000 by gambling during World War II. He had a good time with the money, spending it all on women, beer, nightclubs, and the track. So Gurm's dad, bit of a gambler.
There we go.
Pretty interesting lore, right?
Like, I do love that. I do love it, because you can see a lot of his inspiration for characters. I mean, obviously, like, and I'm very curious to see if these characters keep their names in House of the Dragon, as like the Tullys during the House of the Dragon era that are all named after Sesame Street characters. There's like Elmo Tully and Kermit and Oscar, like, are they
and the
gonna
Boltons are definitely a nod towards Dracula,
right? And
for
there's
sure.
an oaken shield. I was, like stuff like that
Mhm.
from the Hobbit. And
Yeah.
so yeah, very interesting to see like if some of those characters, and you can tell what his inspiration. I mean, clearly when he was writing about the Tullys during the House of the Dragon era, he was just like, yep, we'll just name these after those Sesame Street characters, I guess.
No one's ever
I
gonna
don't know.
buy this book. Forget it.
Was like a Sesame Street episode on when he was writing those characters, I guess.
Maybe. It's possible.
Maybe. Another thing that gets kind of named here is, I thought this would be kind of cool. Pull this up, another little tidbit here is kind of a tie into like Lady Stoneheart a little bit here. So by the time her cup was empty, Arya was yawning. Gendry hadn't come back. Tom Seven Strings was singing two hearts that beat as one, and kissing a different girl at the end of every verse. In the corner by the window, Lem and Harwin sat talking to the red-haired Tansy in low voices. Spent the night in Jaime's cell, she heard the woman say. Her and this other wench, the one who slew Renly. All three of them together, and come for the morn, Lady Catelyn cut him loose for love. She gave a throaty chuckle. It's not true, Arya thought. She never would. She felt sad and angry and lonely all at once. So she's getting a little bit of the story of, Catelyn was the one who let Jaime loose, but I just like that, like, cut him loose and then a throaty chuckle, since we all know that's going to be the deal with Catelyn, is like the cut throat, right?
Yeah, that's brutal, dude.
Yeah. So
Cheeky,
we have
George.
very cheeky. So as you continued
throaty.
on, or throaty, there you go. So yeah, it kind of continues on. This chapter kind of continues on a little bit here, and we see Gendry come in, and Gendry is kind of like upset by a lot of things. I think he's kind of upset when they're talking about like the highborn lords, and like it feels like that's something he's getting, upset about. And remember that Gendry's character, I think from the show and the books, pretty different.
Yeah.
I do not think that Gendry is going to get named the heir to Storm's End at the end of this whole thing, because there's Edric Storm, who's kind of like that character that Gendry takes a lot of parts from. So as this chapter kind of finishes up, really, and I'll just read some of this last little bit here. Again, this is a shorter chapter. So Arya sat up yawning. Gendry was stirring on her left, and Lem Lemoncook snoring loudly to her right, but the baying outside all but drowned him out. There must be 100 dogs out there. She crawled up from under the blankets and hopped over Lem, Tom, and Jack Be Lucky to the window. When she opened the shutters wide, wind and wet and cold all came flooding in together. The day was gray and overcast. Down below in the square, the dogs were barking, running in circles, growling and howling. There was a pack of them, great black mastiffs and leaned wolfhounds, and black and white sheepdogs and kinds Arya did not know. Between the inn and the fountain, a dozen riders sat astride their horses, watching the townsmen open the fat man's cages and tug his arm until his swollen corpse spilled out into the ground. The dogs were at him at once, tearing chunks of flesh off his bones. Arya heard one of the riders laugh. "Here's your new castle, you bloody Lannister bastard," he said. "A little snug for the likes of you, but we'll squeeze you in, never fret." Behind him, a prisoner sat sullen with coils of hempen rope tight around his wrists. Some of the townsmen were throwing dung at him, but he never flinched. "You'll rot in them cages," his captor was shouting. "The crows will be picking out your eyes while we were spending all that good Lannister gold of yours. And when them crows are done, we'll send what's left to your bloody brother, though I doubt he'll know you." The noise had broken half the peach. Gendry squeezed into the window besides Arya, and Tom stepped up behind them, naked as his name day. "What's all this bloody shouting?" Lem complained from bed. "A man's trying to get some bloody sleep." "Where's Greenbeard?" Tom asked him. "A bed with Tansy," Lem said. kind of continues on here. Lannister, said Arya. I heard him say Lannister. Have they caught the Kingslayer? Gendry wanted to know. Down in the square, a thrown stone caught the captive on the cheek, turning his head. Not the Kingslayer, Arya thought when she saw his face. The gods have heard her prayers after all.
Yeah. The Hound.
Yep.
Caught by a Hound master.
Yeah. So of course you don't know that until the next Arya chapter.
Yeah.
When you have to see who it is, which actually is kind of a not very George thing to do. Normally he actually would say the Hound there. Like if you really look at the end of a lot of his chapters, a lot of times he would give you that, but for whatever reason he doesn't decide to do that here.
And also remember the Hound's been missing since Clash of Kings.
Yes.
So this is like a big reemergence of a major character, one that we could have maybe presumed was going to be off screen for the rest of the, like he's gone.
Mhm.
But George brings the Hound back around, and I think the Hound will be back around again in the series if George were to write more books. I don't think that he's done with the Hound quite yet.
No, I very much think the Hound is going to be the Gravedigger, and I think Clegane Bowl is going to happen much earlier. I think Clegane Bowl, all right, the big battle between the Hound and the Mountain, is going to be like a trial by combat thing between Cersei and the Faith. I think the Faith is going to Cersei's going to get to choose the Mountain to defend her in trial by combat, which obviously doesn't happen in the show, and it's going to be, and they're going to choose the Hound.
So then the Faith wins that, right?
Yeah, probably.
So then where does the Faith go after that?
I think they're going to have Cersei's trial. They're going to have the trial by combat, and they're going to have like Cersei's like execution at the Sept of Baelor, and then Cersei just blows it up.
You think? That would be pretty wild, wouldn't it?
I think that's how you do it, and I think Clegane Bowl will happen there. Clegane Bowl happening in the. It didn't even matter. Like
it was not executed very well.
It didn't. It
was pretty cool, but
it didn't even matter because the whole thing blew up.
No, it didn't.
It's like no point.
Though whenever Qyburn tries to walk by and the Mountain just smashes his head against the wall, is one of the
I could see that happen.
Yeah, it was pretty sick.
To just Qyburn it's just killed. But yeah, I think the Game Bowl is going to happen much earlier.
Yeah, I kind of like that idea. I like that, and maybe that's something that we should speculate about. Is like in one of the future episodes, is kind of like where we see the Faith going, or even Cersei as a character, because that's one I think is going to be a lot different than the show.
Oh, so yeah, I don't think Cersei's
but we'll have plenty of time for that when we get to Feast for Crows, and she's like the star of the show because she is the best thing in Feast for Crows by a mile. Yeah,
I don't think that Winds of Winter and Dream for Spring is going to be shots of only Cersei standing outside of a window drinking wine, making $1 million an episode.
But Lena Headey did a great job. She did
a great job. Crushed it. The easiest job in the world. All right.
Good for her.
Hey, absolutely. So awesome. All right. Well, hey, with that, guys, want to thank you for playing the Game of Thrones. Our next episode, we will be back with a Storm of Swords, Jon 4.
And if you like our podcast, don't forget to subscribe, like us, write a review, leave a comment, or send us a raven at btkcast@gmail.com or bendthekneepodcast.com.
We'll see you next time. And remember that winter is coming.